You stub your toe on a table leg this morning. A sharp burst of pain shoots through your foot. You curse. You hop on one leg for a few seconds. Maybe you complain about it to someone. Then by lunchtime, it's already forgotten. For most people watching this video, that's about as painful as today is going to get. But for most of human history, pain wasn't an inconvenience. It was the main event. A twisted ankle could leave you stranded. A small cut could become a death sentence. A toothache could torment you for months, and some deaths were so horrifying that even modern horror movies rarely come close. Yet here's the strange part. You are alive because of the people who survived all of it. Your body is the final product of an unbroken chain stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Every ancestor in that chain survived long enough to have children, every single one, which means you are not descended from the people who died of thirst after getting lost. You are not descended from the hunter who bled to death from a spear wound. You are not descended from the child whose infection never healed. Those bloodlines ended, yours didn't. So if your ancestors were the survivors, what exactly happened to everyone else? Start with childbirth. For most of human history, giving birth was one of the most dangerous things a human body could attempt. Anthropologists Michael Gervin and Hillard Kaplan studied mortality patterns across surviving hunter-gatherer societies in 2007, building a composite picture of what life and death looked like before modern medicine. Their data showed that a huge share of early deaths clustered around 2 points: infancy and the reproductive years. Childbirth killed mothers through hemorrhage, through infection, through obstructed labor with no surgical option. A pelvis slightly too narrow, a baby position slightly wrong, there was no emergency room, there was no second chance, just hours, sometimes days of labor that ended in death for one person or both. Now think about infection. You take infection for granted today. You get a cut, you clean it, maybe you put on a bandage, and within a week it is gone. For most of human history, that same cut could kill you. A scratch from a thorn, a bite from an animal, a broken bone that pierced the skin. Without antibiotics, without antiseptic, a wound could turn septic within days. The skin around it would swell, the fever would climb, and there was nothing anyone could do but watch. Archaeologists studying ancient skeletons find this story written directly into bone. Tooth abscesses are everywhere in the fossil record. An abscess sounds small. It is not small. Left untreated, an infected tooth can spread into the jaw, into the bloodstream, into the brain. People died from toothaches. Let that sit for a moment. A problem you solve today with a single dentist visit used to be a death sentence. Then there is violence. Not the kind you see in movies with clean duels and clear winners. Real prehistoric violence. In 2016, a team led by paleoanthropologist Marta Mirazon-Lar excavated a site called Nataruk in Kenya, dating back roughly 10,000 years. What they found was a group of bodies showing signs of a coordinated, brutal attack. Skulls crushed by blunt weapons, arrow wounds, bound hands. This was not a single fight between two angry men. This looked like one group attacking another methodically with intent to wipe them out. It remains one of the earliest known examples of organized human violence ever discovered. Death by another human being was not rare. It was, for long stretches of prehistory, one of the leading causes of death among adult men specifically. Researchers studying skeletal collections from later periods, long before the rise of organized states, have repeatedly found the same pattern: skulls with healed fractures stacked on top of fresh, fatal ones. Evidence of lives spent absorbing repeated blows and somehow surviving, right up until the injury that finally did not heal. Cranial trauma shows up disproportionately on the left side of skulls in many of these collections, a detail anthropologists interpret as the signature of right-handed attackers striking face-to-face opponents. Even the angle of a wound, thousands of years later, can still tell you something about the final moments of a stranger's life. you might assume the biggest threat was always something dramatic, a saber-toothed cat dragging someone off into the dark. That story is partly true, but it is incomplete. Anthropologist Robert Sussman spent years building what became known as the man-the-hunted hypothesis, arguing that early hominins were far more often prey than predator. Fossil evidence backs this up. Some of the oldest hominin skulls ever found show puncture marks that match the canine teeth of leopards. Your ancestors were not always the apex predator, standing fearlessly atop the food chain. For a long stretch of evolutionary history, they were something closer to prey that occasionally fought back. Even after your ancestors stopped being regular prey, a quieter killer took the predator's place. Disease that spread through close contact, through shared food, through the simple act of living near other people, became one of the deadliest forces in human history once populations grew large enough to sustain it. Respiratory infections that today resolve in a week of rest could spiral into pneumonia within days, and without any way to support breathing artificially, pneumonia was often the final stage of dozens of unrelated illnesses. A child weakened by one infection had little defense against the next one that followed. Death rarely came from a single cause. It came from a chain of small failures, each one weakening the body for the next. But predators were not even the most efficient killers. Something much smaller was. Parasites, waterborne pathogens, dysentery. These killed slowly, quietly, and constantly. A contaminated water source could wipe out a third of a small group within weeks. Diarrheal disease, something you might experience today as an unpleasant 24 hours, could dehydrate a body to the point of organ failure within days, especially in children. There were no oral rehydration salts, there was no clean tap water, just thirst and then weakness and then nothing. Famine deserves its own mention because it did not kill quickly. It killed slowly and it killed cruelly. A bad season, a drought, a herd of animals that migrated somewhere else and never came back. The human body, when starved, does not simply shut down all at once. It cannibalizes itself in order: fat first, then muscle, then organ tissue. Studies of skeletal remains from famine periods show stress lines in the bones themselves, a kind of biological scar tissue called Harris lines, marking the points where growth simply stopped because the body had nothing left to build with. Children who survived one famine often carried shorter adult height for the rest of their lives, a permanent record of a season they were too young to remember. Cold killed too, in a way that almost sounds peaceful compared to everything else. Hypothermia does not announce itself with pain the way an infection does. It arrives as confusion first. A person wandering away from shelter starts to feel warm instead of cold, a strange neurological trick the dying brain plays on itself in the final stages of exposure. Some will even remove their clothing, convinced they are overheating, moments before they lose consciousness entirely. For groups migrating across unfamiliar terrain, a single unexpected storm could quietly claim the weakest members of the group, the very young, the very old, the already sick, without a single dramatic moment anyone could point to afterward. Heat was its own killer in different climates. Without shade, without water reserves, without any way to cool the body beyond sweat and stillness, heat stroke could set in within hours of sustained exertion under a relentless sun. The body's core temperature climbs past the point where its own proteins begin to break down, and once that threshold is crossed, the damage often cannot be undone even if relief eventually comes. Hunting in the wrong season or being caught far from water during a drought was not a minor miscalculation. It was a gamble with your own organs as the stake. Then there were the animals that did not need to be apex predators to be lethal. You picture a lion or a bear when you imagine prehistoric danger, something large and dramatic. But snake bites, scorpion stings, and infected insect bites likely killed far more people quietly and routinely than any large predator ever did. A venomous bite in a world without anti-venom was not automatically fatal, but it often meant days of swelling, fever, and agony, with survival depending entirely on the species involved and sheer luck. Even something as small as a tick-carrying disease could end a life that had survived survived every larger threat the world had thrown at it. Why does any of this matter to you now, sitting somewhere warm, reading this on a screen that did not exist a generation ago? Because your body still remembers all of it. Every instinct you have, your fear of the dark, your aversion to spoiled food, your flinch reflex at a sudden movement in your peripheral vision, was shaped by ancestors who died from exactly the threats that built those instincts. The ones who flinched survived. The ones who did not pass anything on. You do not think about dying from a toothache. You do not worry that childbirth will end in tragedy. You do not fear that the water from your tap will kill your children within the month. That is not because the world became less dangerous on its own. It is because humans built layers of protection between you and almost every single threat that used to be fatal. Antibiotics, sanitation, modern obstetrics, refrigeration. Each one quietly erased a category of death that used to be common. And maybe that is the strangest part of all of this. The body you carry around every day was built, generation after generation, to survive a world that no longer exists. The anxiety you feel before a presentation, the way your heart races when you hear a strange noise at night, the instinct to avoid eye contact with someone who feels threatening, none of that was designed for the world you live in now. It was designed for a world where a single infected scratch, a single bad birth, a single contaminated stream could end everything. So the next time you stub your toe and curse under your breath, remember what that small, sharp pain actually represents. It represents a body that made it, a body descended from people who avoided the abscess, who survived the birth, who drank from the right stream, who ran from the right shadow at the right moment. You are not just alive. You are the end result of an unbroken streak of correct decisions, lucky breaks, and narrow escapes stretching back further than written history itself. You stub your toe on a table leg this morning. You curse. You hop on one foot for a second, and for the briefest moment you are standing on the shoulders of every ancestor who did not die the way the world almost killed them.